Hi there, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to explain about basic calculator implementation. Let's look at the problem description. We are given a string S representing a valid expression, and we have to implement a calculator to evaluate that expression and return the result. We should not use any built-in function to evaluate the mathematical expression. So let's take a look at the example 1. So the input expression is 1 plus 1, so which evaluates to 2. And the second example, it is 2 minus 1 plus 2, which evaluates to 3. So in the case of example 3, we have a nested expressions. So in this case, we have to evaluate the innermost expression first. So in this case, first we evaluate 4 plus 5 plus 2. So it becomes 11, and then plus 1, 12, and minus 3. This sub expression evaluates to 9. And this one evaluates to 6 plus 8, 14. So 14 plus 9, 23. So the constraints for this problem are the length of the expression is ranging from 1 to 300,000. The S consists of digits, plus sign, minus sign, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, and space. And S represents a valid expression, and plus is not used as an unary operation. Okay, so the plus 1 is not a valid expression, and plus of 2 plus 3 is also invalid. But minus could be used as a unary operation. Minus 1 is a valid expression, and a minus of 2 plus 3 is also valid. And there will be no two consecutive operators in the input, and every number and running calculation will fit in a 32-bit integer. Let's look at the approach to solve this problem. We are given this input expression, which is 10 minus of 1 plus 5. This evaluates to value 4. We can use a stack to evaluate this expression. In addition to the stack, we need to maintain 3 variables. One is operand, that is initialized to 0, and the sign initialized with 1. Sign value 1 indicates positive, minus 1 indicates negative signs we have encountered most recently. And then the result variable will be initialized with 0. As we process the expression, we keep adding that operands depending on the sign. And then whenever we see a nested expression, we push the current so far computed result and the sign into the stack. And once we complete the nested expressions value, then we pop the top 2 elements and then add it to the result. For example, as we traverse, whenever we see a digit, we update the operand by multiplying the current operand's value by 10 and adding this digit that is visited now. Next, whenever we see either a plus or minus sign, we have to multiply the operand and the sign and add that product to the result. And whenever we see a open parenthesis, we push the current result and the sign into the stack. Whenever we see a close parenthesis, we add the product of operand and the sign to the result, and then we pop the top element, which is the operator seen before we start evaluating the current expression. So we multiply the result with the sign, and then we pop the second element, which is the first operand, and add that to the result. We keep repeating this until we reach the end of the expression. Finally, we can get the value of the expression. That's what I have written here. First, we initialize the operand, result, and the sign variables, and then initialize the stack and start traversing the characters in the input string. And in each iteration, if there is a digit, if the current character is a digit, then multiply the operand by 10 and add the current digit. And if the current character is equal to plus sign, then add the product of sign and the operand to the result and assign 1 to the sign and assign 0 to the operand. If the current character is equal to the minus sign, then add the product of sign and the operand to the result and then assign minus 1 to the sign variable. And then if the current character is equal to open parenthesis, then push the current result and the sign into the stack and update the sign and reset the result value to 0. If the current character is equal to a close parenthesis, then add the product of sign and the operand to the result and then pop the top element, which is this most recently encountered sign operator and multiply the current result with that popped value, and then pop the second element from the stack and add that to the result. We repeat that until we reach the end of the string, add the product of sign and the operand to the result variable, and finally return the result. Let's look at the flowchart. Input for this procedure is string s. Initialize the stack and then the operand, result, and sign variables. So operand is initialized with 0, sign is initialized with 1, and result is initialized with 0, and the stack is initialized with empty slice of integers. And in this for loop we traverse the characters in the input string, and first we check whether the current character is space. If that is true, then skip that character, and if the current character is digit, update the operand by multiplying the current value of the operand by 10 and adding that digit seen. Else, if the current digit is a plus sign, then add the product of sign and the operand to the result variable and update the result, and then assign 1 to the sign indicating that we have encountered plus sign, and then reset the operand value to 0. If the current character is a minus sign, then we do the same thing, add these product of sign and the operand to the result and update the sign variable with -1 because we have seen minus. Else, if the current character is an open parenthesis, then push the result into the stack and then sign variable into the stack and then reset the result variable to 0 and sign variable to 1. If the current character is close parenthesis, then add the product of sign and the operand variable to the result and then pop the top element and multiply that with the current result and update the result variable. Then pop the next element from the stack and add that to the result. Then reset the operand and assign 1 to the sign variable. We repeat this until we process all the characters in the input string. After we come out of the loop, we add the product of sign and operand variable to the result and update the result, and then finally return the result variable as the value of that expression. Let's move on to coding. First, I define a structure for the stack data structure. This has a data of type slice of int top index. Next, I define a init method for this structure. I initialize the data with empty slice of int, and then I initialize the top index with -1. Then I define the push method for the stack. I append the number to the data slice, and then I increment the top index. Next, I define the pop function. This will return an integer. So I read the integer at index top in the data slice, and then I adjust the data slice, and then I decrement the top index. First, I define the stack, and then I initialize the operand variable to 0, and then the sign variable with 1, and then the result variable with 0. Then I initialize the stack by calling the init method. Then I write the for loop to traverse the characters in the input string. If the current character is a space, then I skip that character. Else, if the current character is a digit, I compute the current digit's numerical value by subtracting digit 0 from the current character, and then I update the operand by multiplying the current value of the operand by 10 and then add the digit value. Else, if the current character is a plus sign, I add the product of the variable sign and the operand to the result variable. Then I reset the operand variable with 0, and the sign variable with 1. Else if the current character is a minus sign, I add the product of sign and operand variable to the result. And then I reset the operand to 0 and the sign variable to -1, because we have seen minus. If the current character is a open parenthesis, then I push the current result and then the sign variable into the stack. Then I reset the result value to 0 and the sign to 1. Else if the current character is seen as close parenthesis, then I update the result by adding the product of sign and the operand variable. Next I pop the top element from the stack and multiply the result variable with that value and update the result. Next I pop the first operand from the stack and add it to the result. Next operand will be initialized with 0 and sign will be initialized with 1. And finally I return the result plus the product of sign and the operand variable. Next I'm going to run the test cases. Okay, I missed the return statement. Okay, all the tests passed. Next I'm going to submit this program. Cool, this program is accepted. Next I'm going to do the code walkthrough with sample input. The input expression given is 10 minus of 4 plus 8. So this evaluates to -2. First we initialize the operand to 0, sign variable to 1 and result to 0. Okay, and then we initialize the stack data structure. Then we enter the for loop to traverse the characters in the input string. Okay, in the iteration 0 we see digit. So we update the operand by multiplying the current value of the operand by 10 and then add the digit value. So in this case the operand will be changed from 0 to 1. In the next iteration we see the digit 0. Again we update the current value of the operand by 10 and then add the current digit. So in this case the operand is 1, so multiply by 10 plus this digit 0, then the operand will become 10. Okay, and in the next iteration we see a space, that character will be skipped, and in the third iteration we see an operator minus, we see the minus sign. So in this case we update the result variable by adding the product of sign and the operand. So the sign and the operand is the product of these two variable is 10. So that will be assigned to the result. So the result will be changed from 0 to 10. And then we update the sign variable to -1 and the operand to 0. So in the next iteration we see the space character. So we skip this. And in the iteration 5 we see the open parenthesis. So in this case we push the current result and the sign into the stack. Okay, so the stack now has two elements. So the first we push the current result and then the current sign value, and then we reset the result to 0 and the sign is assigned with 1. Okay, in the next iteration we encounter a digit. So in that case we update the operand by multiplying the current operand value by 10 and add the current digit. So in this case the operand is 0. So 0 plus 4, the operand will have the value 4. In the next iteration we see a plus character. So in that case we add the product of sign and the operand to the result. So in this case 4 times 1 4. So the result is updated with 4. and then the operand is reset to 0 and the sign will be updated with 1. Next we encounter the digit 8. So in that case the operand will be updated with 8. The current value of the operand is multiplied by 10 and that 8 is added to that value. So we have 8 in the operand value. Next we encounter a close parenthesis. So in this case we add the product of the current sign and the operand value to the result. Okay. So the current operand is 8 and the sign is 1. So when this line is executed, we have the value 12 because the current value of the result is 4 plus 8, 12. And then we pop the top element from the stack and multiply the current result with that value and update the result. So now the result will become minus 12. And then we pop the next element from the stack, which is 10. So when we add 10 with minus 12, we get minus 2. Okay. So the final result is minus 2. That is an expected output. Next I'm going to do the time and space complexity analysis for this solution. The time complexity for this procedure is order of n, where n is the number of characters in the input string. Okay. Because we need to process all the characters in the input string to evaluate the expression. Let's take a look at this case 1 where the input string is of length 12 characters. So we need to process all the 12 characters. This for loop performs 12 iterations. Okay. So if there are n characters, it will perform n iterations. So the time complexity is order of n. Space complexity is order of n, where n is the maximum depth of the next nested expression. For example, in this case, we have a nested expression, the depth 1. For this case, the maximum stack space required to evaluate this expression is 2. Okay, because whenever we see an open parenthesis, we need to store the current operand and the current sign. Okay, so depending on the depth of the nested expression, we need to store that many number of elements in the stack. Okay, for in this case, the nested level is 1. So maximum stack size is 1 times 2, 2. Nested level is 2 for this expression. Okay, so in this case, the maximum stack size is 2 times 2, 4. So if there are a nested level is n, then the maximum stack size is 2 times n. We remove the constant factor out, so that space complexity is order of n. Thanks for watching this video. Have a great day.